15, so going to go ahead and get started here. I apologize if this is too loud or too quiet. This is a first-time briefing where there's just people walking by, so I'll do my best to modulate this a little bit, and if I go too far out of bounds on what folks are interested in, let me know. Just raise your hand, and we can kind of get things back on track. So feel free to interrupt me. Sounds like there's the mic over there to do exactly that. I have my hecklers here from the JFHU Doden family. So good morning, everyone. Captain Sean Nelson. I am the J5, the Director of Strategy, Plans, and Partnerships at Joint Force Headquarters, Doden. This morning, I'm going to be briefing you on the Joint Force in Contested Cyberspace. What does that mean, really? It's a focus on what resiliency means. We talk about the word a lot, but when it comes time to measure it, things get a little bit more wonky. So what we're going to do this morning is talk through the different types, which takes us to this first slide. So when I first checked on board about a year ago, that was one of the first questions that was posed to me was, what does this word mean? Boss wants to measure it. We need to figure out, let's look in doctrine to see what resiliency is. And there's nothing in there. It's used a couple times, but nobody actually defines it. So we try to make it simple, right? So as a former ship driver, now a cyber guy, one of the things that I come back to a lot is that regular warfighters, they don't want to talk about this cyber stuff. Like, tell me what's important to my mission, and then let me get back to doing, driving ships, blowing things up, etc. So, keeping it simple, we said, resiliency in cyberspace operations is the ability for commanders to fight through the pain. The pain can be a lot of different things. An adversary's attack, it can be a system that just starts arcing and sparking for some reason. How can the mission go on in a world where we kind of have increasingly plugged things into networks and cyber-aware systems and so on? So started with that definition, that it is the ability for commanders to fight through the pain. But then we start to get into the difference between technical resiliency and operational resiliency. So a lot of the folks here, they're going to jump immediately to technical resiliency. How can I make this network a full mesh? How can I create, overlapping virtual machines that fail over to each other? But from a C2 headquarters perspective, we recognize that if we're going to rebuild systems, that's going to take time. That's going to take multiple years. And we may not have that if we're going to achieve resiliency kind of inside of the next year or 2 years. So instead of focusing on technical resiliency, we start to look at operational resiliency. What can we do with the warfighters, how they act in the near term to achieve positive outcomes inside of our own lifetimes, frankly. So this will be focused on operational resiliency, the people, the processes adjacent to the cyber-enabled systems that comprise the Doden. So emphasis on cyber-enabled, because a lot of people, the N is even in the term Doden. We think about networks. When we think of the Doden, though, it's about things that maybe are not networked. The HVAC systems that are cyber aware, they understand zeros and ones. We think about our weapon systems and OT that, while they are increasingly networked, are not always. And the lab environments, the EDUs, a lot of different things that are not necessarily on any sort of monolithic network. But all of that, the peoples, the processes, how do we make them more operationally resilient? So when we look at the event that may occur, it's helpful to look at what happens before the event, what happens during the event, and what happens after the event in terms of where we can influence operational resiliency. Before the event, we have this thing that we like to talk about, which is risk to mission, or cyber risk to mission. What are the components to that? If we look at JP5, Joint Publication 5.0, risk is comprised of the likelihood and the severity, or probability and consequence. They change the word every couple of years, but it's the same sort of thing. On the likelihood side, we focus on threat. So why the system may not work when we expect it to. Now, a lot of people jump from threat immediately to adversary. What is a hacker doing somewhere? But we have to kind of open the aperture on that and think about, well, we also have insiders. We have indiscipline. We have just, I'm going to use the Navy reference, sailors doing stupid stuff, breaking the system. We also have kind of an acquisitions environment where we may have made something but never actually fully transitioned into a program where someone's going to be taking care of this thing long term. Or we may have stopped funding a program, but the operators may continue to use that well past its life cycle. So any of those things kind of can contribute ultimately to the likelihood. But that if I want to understand risk to mission ultimately, what happens when this box stops working, I have to think about the severity. That's the association between the system and the missions that it supports. And that can be slightly associated, or it can be strongly associated. And I'll get into kind of a description of what mission mapping looks like and different ways to do that in a minute. So in order to get that beforehand, you have to understand the common understanding of mission. Who is my audience? Am I talking to a combatant commander, or am I talking to kind of a tactical level warfighter? Each of them think about their missions in different ways. And then you have to ultimately do that mission decomposition to go down to the platforms where these systems are, or the sites, or if you're in the cloud, what are the different hypervisors and virtual machines that are running those. So that's all before the event, illuminating what the risk is, the likelihood, and what happens when something bad happens. Now during the event, something bad is happening. How can I be operationally resilient? One piece is reporting. So just making people aware that the system is compromised or going down in the first place. On the cyber side, a lot of times we silo our reporting. If a system goes down, I will go tell the CSSP, or I will tell the SOC or the NOC or somebody else that there's a problem, or the ISSM, but I forget about the operational reporting on the other side, the warfighter that expects that system to be operational. And it's not one or the other. It's dual reporting and making sure that we're making sure all commanders understand that there's a degradation or a loss risk in that mission. And then PACE plans. And a lot of us are familiar with those, but primary, alternate, contingency, and emergency. Think about, from an operator perspective, what happens if this projector goes down? Well, what's my alternate? Do I have another projector that I can bring in? Contingency, maybe I just need to be able to talk without looking at the slides. Or emergency, hey, we'll just reschedule this for a couple hours from now. That is not something that a technical community can provide. That's something that the operators have to think through themselves. Whereas on the post-event side, now that the event's occurred and we've fixed it, we look at the technical solutions. Local restoral capability is something that, from a fleet perspective, certainly we've gotten increasingly bad at. We have sailors, we have ITs out on ships, but if a system goes down, they're told to call the help desk, and somebody will fly out to the ship or walk you through it virtually, versus empowering the local operators and maintainers to control their own destiny. At 2 a.m., that 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, help desk is not going to be available, but that ship still needs to keep going. So empowering the local commanders to do that local restoral. Technical overwatch, where that does exceed the capacity of the local forces, ensure that there is a maneuver force on the technical side, not necessarily the counter hacker type folks to fly out, but somebody that can come out and re-image a machine at scale is important. And then post-event hardening. So this is about cost imposition. The adversary is going to attack us. How can we make sure that they don't get to use that same vector again? So learn from what happened, and then push those lessons learned out to the greater force so that they can collectively harden. Across the bottom, we see kind of unifying principles here. So if we have cyber risk to mission, we have the identification of the forces and the options. How can we present that to a commander? That's the cyberspace situational awareness. It's not the same as it is in a lot of warfighting domains where I want to see a picture of the map and where are the forces moving through the map. It's more of a picture of the services and the risk associated with those services and the connection into the mission itself. And then training and exercise. We certainly on the Doden side keep coming back to reps and sets. How do we train the force and assess the force to determine whether they're ready to do things? But if we don't have the things determined in the first place, if we don't have all of the options kind of across the middle here in place, and then have standards associated with those, there's no way to train that local force and evaluate how good they are at local restoral. And for example, if I need a ship's enterprise system to be re-imageable in its entirety in 8 hours, right? I got to set 8 hours, I have to provide them the options, and then I have to allow them the opportunity to do that. And I know coming from a ship, they're never going to be allowed to do that. We treat that thing like it's it's going to blow up any minute. Like we don't even say the word re-image. But we want to get resilient, certainly operationally, we have to figure out how to drill and then work to set those standards in a realistic way. So what does this look like as it's pulled together? kind of put a bit of a ConOps here together so you can kind of understand if we build all of those options and associate them, what can we as an operational command start to see? So at the top we have again a Navy version of this with a strike group. And the first piece is that common understanding of mission. So from a strike group's perspective, they use the Surface Force Training and Readiness Manual or the CV Trainman, I think, on the carrier side, but it's really what the ships use to certify so that they can get away from the pier and go out and deploy. So there's things like mobility, strike, anti-submarine warfare, surface warfare, air warfare. You see those across the top. And with the association of mission, we determine what are those systems which support, in this case, strike. And so if you think about strike from an aircraft carrier, you think about aircraft. So a lot of it is the platform that is the aircraft itself, but then it's going to be things like the mission planning system, the ordnance control system, other things that follow that overall mission thread. So you drill down, you see a couple examples there of those systems. And then when we just look at the system itself, right, we're thinking about a portfolio view of the system. What is the ATO? What is the map of the system? What's the hardware and the software configuration? But not where is the system actually deployed. Those of us that are worked in a program office, we have this perfect baby. We say this is a low risk system. It's great. But then when I deploy it out to the fleet, those guys mess it up and it becomes a very ugly baby. And that's not my fault. That's the operators that are doing that, right? From an operational perspective, we got to think about both, really integrate the two. So I have the kind of the C2 system captured there, and then I have the platforms where it is actually deployed in the wild. And it's on those platforms where I start to associate the threats. So an insider threat, indiscipline, a system failure. I shape those threats into information requirements. What are the different indicators that I can look at associated, the questions that I can ask about adversaries, or about maybe the ASUBO or the operational availability of a system, or its patching status from a CVE, static vulnerability perspective. And then I associate those information requirements with decisions, because at the end of the day, if I'm going to show risk and I present that to a commander, the first thing they're going to do is say, so what? Like, what can I do about this? What are my options? And so when you're in that indicator and information requirement space, you have to start associating things with your audience. What are the things that, in this case, the carrier CO can do? The strike group commander, maybe the program office associated with the system, the fleet level. Different folks have different authorities and capabilities at different points in that C2 chain. And then we associate that blue line there with how what is the severity of that system going down. So they all look the same here, but in practice what you want to do is, the C2 system maybe is a moderate connection into strike, where the mission planning system is a high level of connection. That lets you modulate what the severity is. With probability and severity, I can finally get to cyber risk to mission, and I get after that piece. Now moving across from the C2 line, you see where the PACE plans come in. And as I mentioned before, what the PACE plans were, who generates them is key. I can't turn around to a program office or the cyber operators or the defenders or somebody and say, give me a PACE plan for that C2 system. They're going to say, I don't operate that C2 system. I have no idea. I get patches in the mail, or WSUS sends me them over the network, and I patch them. I have no idea what would happen if that system went down. So you have to shift your fires to the operators. Versus on the options side, where I do very specifically want to talk to the program offices and I want to talk to the actual local defenders and determine if you needed to confound a denial of service attack against that C2 system, what are the actual technical changes that you can make to that system, and what's the resultant technical risk associated with that? Not risk to mission, not risk to force, not risk to the DODN, but like the risk to the operation of that system. Like if you disconnect that C2 system from the network, it just doesn't work anymore. That's high technical risk. Versus, well, they're going to have to change their password every 5 seconds. Okay, it still operates though. Okay, that's a little bit more moderate to low-high technical risk. On the bottom there, we talk about the forces, the functions, and the terrain, because when we think about the DODN writ large, or even this small picture where we're looking specifically at a strike group, as I hop from system to system and platform to platform, the forces and the functions stay consistent, the forces change. The defenders, the security forces, the operators, the maintainers, and the managers. If I look at that C2 system, the maintainers and the managers, that's going to be maybe a government program office, and it's going to be maybe a systems command that's providing the technical overwatch on the maintainer side. But then if I shift to the enterprise, well, now it's maybe not a government program office. Maybe it's a civilian, it's Microsoft, it's Azure, something like that that's providing that from a management side. If I'm on the weapons system enclave, maybe from a security force, I have a systems command with a SOC that's providing that incident response capability, the continuous monitoring. But if I shift over to the enterprise, now it's more of a uniformed approach with a network operations center and somebody else. So identifying all those folks well in advance helps us understand the readiness of that problem, the risk, the resiliency, and then if there is an incident, I know who to call and how to build that team, because it's never going to be uniform. A lot of times we talk about kind of the DODN of tomorrow, where, or you've heard it as, the JIE, where this is all just going to be one kind of homogenous thing. Unlikely to occur if we still continue to define the DODN as including OT and gap systems and mission systems. It's always going to be a hybrid, which means that is always going to be a problem. So I talked about information requirements on risk. What do those things look like? And what is the difference between a system-centric and a unit-centric indicator? On the system-centric side, we have those questions again that are talking about that system in the cradle. What is its baseline cybersecurity? The authority to operate. Do we have detailed maps and analysis and the installation footprint? Basic information about that baby. Do we have its birth certificate? Have tailored mitigation options and pre-planned responses been provided for that system? Again, that's a technical solution that's provided by the program office. And then does it support continuous monitoring requirements? We talk about ConMon a lot, or ISCM if you're looking at the 8530 world. That needs to be organic ultimately to the system. It doesn't work well if it's a bolt-on solution. So an indicator of risk may be that it has been an integrated solution, from birth of the system. Then we look at the purple there, which shifts from system-centric to more of a blend of system and unit-centric. This is where we talk about the individual instances of those systems out in the wild. So now, is the crew maintaining the critical security controls? What is the vulnerability status of the system? So not just CVEs, but the red team kind of, what's the post-integration resultant risk on that system? What's its material condition? Again, if we think about what are the risks or the threats associated with this, we can think about poorly maintained or actively cannibalizing this system, or just its original design never met the 0.95 operational availability that we were looking for. It's more of a 0.65. Operational performance of the system. This is where we talk about the spectrum of operations to security, right? A perfectly secure system does not operate, and a perfectly operational system is not secure. So where are we in that balance? And that's looking back at those KPPs that the capability requirement holder asked for. I asked for, 0.5 seconds between a key press and a change in the system. Well, we've patched this thing so much and bolted so much security onto this that it's actually 5 seconds. That's important from a risk perspective. I'm not going to be able to turn this thing around in time if I'm not able to do it quickly. And then indications of malicious activity on the system. This is the sensing and the monitoring piece that we still need to come back to. That is going to, again, be different across the deployment footprint of that system. Then we move into the pure unit-centric side. This is now system independent. Now I'm looking at what's the manning status of the site. If this is a ship, and I'm supposed to be at, at least 85% manned, and I am sitting at 71% manned, that presents significant risk. I may not have the right local defenders in place at scale to do what I need to do in a crisis. What is the assessment of the workforce's performance? Coming back to the training and exercise standards, are they able to meet the requirements and work together across the force that we set? And then are static and maneuver forces aligned in the overwatch of the site? This is, do we have a CSSP assigned to the terrain? Is a SOC continuously monitoring? Is somebody looking at the logs? And do I have a maneuver force that can be deployed in extremis, right? Do they have reciprocity with their kits? Do they understand who's who? Do they understand what pattern of life is on the system? All of those sorts of things that are essential to get after freedom of maneuver in crisis. So collectively, we look at all of those things as information requirements. We got to understand that the data is going to be different system to system, platform to platform, especially if you're sitting at the DODN side. I've got 45 different DODN AO commanders. Some of them are services. Some of them are combat support agencies, some of them are combat commanders. Everyone has a different definition of what their kind of unit of action is, or the types of systems that they run, et cetera. So we have to sit at the data agnostic side, set questions, and then allow those local commanders and forces to map their unique data in to answer our question. Really gets to a big data problem pretty quickly, which I'm sure somebody else is talking about out here, about how they can take all of that different, the volume, the velocity, the variety, and the veracity of the different data that's going to come in and make sense about it in a kind of a clean way, like you see here. I talked about mission mapping. That's that low, moderate, high association between types of systems on the left and then the understanding of mission across the top. So mission across the top here is the Surface Force Training and Readiness Manual. Again, that's very tailored and unique to ship's force. And then just some examples of the systems there. You see that it is a one-to-many relationship. Those of you that are familiar with mission-relevant terrain cyberspace mapping and other sorts of things, and MBSE and digital twins and all of that, you're like, it's way more complicated than this. I got to understand whether the print spooler is more important than the domain controller, is more important than this process or whatever. And that's all great. If you want the 100%, absolutely go down that. But if we're going to do this at scale and get after everything, we've got to look at it. We've got to simplify what we can. And this is probably the 80% solution, to just understand a systems association to the mission. And then what does this look like when we pull it all together? What does the commander of JFHQ Doden need to look at when he walks onto the watch floor? And so what Ars has told us several times is, I just want to come in and understand what is the risk of the Doden today, and is it riskier than it was yesterday? So in order to do that, you've got to start down at the indicator level, and you see that in the bottom right. So we look at two sides of the coin. We look at the force readiness. So if I look at the CSSP, if I look at a Doden AO commander, if I look at a SOC, what are the mission functions and tasks of that force? And just like those that are familiar with DERS, the Defense Readiness Reporting System, right? Are you red, yellow, green? That rolls up in to give you an idea from a system-centric view. So system 1.2.2, what is the readiness of the DAO commander, the CPT and Overwatch, the Network Operations Center right now? Then on the terrain posture side, I get into more of the indicators that we talked about before. The security baseline, the continuous monitoring capability, physical assessments. Have you had a Cora recently, which is another discussion that they're going to be having tomorrow, I think, or a red team, blue team, assist, etc. All of those indicators roll up into what is the terrain posture right now. I take terrain, I take the force readiness, and I can start to give the risk associated with a particular system. Then I look at the systems across the board that are uniquely mapped into that mission, which is the kind of mission one across the board. The way we break that mission down is into the task critical assets. You saw those as the sites and the platforms on the previous side. So I can understand that task critical asset based on the aggregate of all of its systems. I look at the aggregation of all of the TCAs associated with mission one. And great, now I can understand the risk to that mission. Who owns that mission, and do they have other missions? Now I need to aggregate those missions to that commander. Put through STRATCOM on here as an example. STRATCOM represents one of the warfighting missions across the DoD. You see business, intelligence, community support, and service organized, train, and equip responsibilities as well. Each of those are going to look at different support head commanders with their missions, with their assets, with their systems, with their forces, and their posture problems as well. And then I can look at the DoD core functions. And that tells me from a steady state, from a providing the Doden, how do we operate the DoD day to day, what is the risk? But it doesn't tell me what is the risk in contingency. So if I'm thinking about a nation state presenting risk with a series of contingencies, I flip that around. It's not about core functions anymore. It's about a phase one, phase two problem set that's been presented and directed to the joint force to get after. So that's another set of supported commanders with different assets that are important at different phases of the operation, their systems and their indicators at the bottom. So for those familiar with a data analytic fabric or data lakes and analytic platforms and whatever else, we get all the data into the pool. The visualization guys can do a lot of cool stuff with it, but you really only need to answer these questions once. I associate indicators to the system once, and then my mapping from system to the mission, that can change a dozen different times. The assets can change a dozen different times as well, and I can present cyber risk to different folks. This is really useful for the Doden commander. But if I'm that strike group commander, I may need to see a very different view of this with a different mission set, but the same systems, the same indicators at the same time, and a common understanding of risk. Those same indicators present the same risk to that system and to that mission. And then the part, what do we do about it, right? So linking those indicators at the bottom to the decision points for that commander, that's where we get the top 5 on the top right. So that is, if no CSSP is assigned to that system, presents a lot of risk, I capture that out of that data lake, and I present it as the number 1 way to buy down risk for that commander that's actionable at his level. Lastly, options. We talked briefly about these, how do I protect against a denial of service attack on a particular given system, right? So first thing we do is we start with kind of a common one-to-end list of the adversary's TTPs. So we use the attack framework here as an example, where we nest the procedures under the techniques, under the tactics, and then we have mitigation options on the distant end. So through the middle is system X, whatever that is. Let's say that is that C2 system that we talked about on the strike group side. In some cases, if it's scanning IP blocks, maybe that does matter for that C2 system. But if it's something under resource development, maybe that doesn't pertain. What's the point here? I take all of those, I look to the program office, and I say, for that C2 system that you presented to us, I want options tailored, technical, sailor-proof instructions that I can push down to those that have deployments of that system, so that I can, at a higher level, at the operation or the low strategic level, say I need to harden against adversary X that has been shown to demonstrate scanning IP blocks, initial access, defense evasion, and all of these different ways. And then when I say it out to the force, it's not just a warning to the force that, hey, these guys might be messing around with you. It actually means something to the guy on the keyboard. There are things that they can do to change the status of the system in order to protect against that attack. On the same side, we want to be able to provide restoral options. So let's say we crank up the defensive posture to block against denial of service. We isolate systems. We set up additional scanning that's going to compete with operational availability and whatever else. Okay, now how do you reset that back to the baseline operation? Well, that's another set of instructions that you need to provide to that operator at the tactical level. So we need to get all of those in place, which freely admit is going to be a massive undertaking that's going to cost a lot of money. So practically, I think what we're looking at doing is working with the ATO process as an authority to connect, to say new systems that are coming on, we need to start planning for the provision of these. For the systems that are out right now, we need to start, again, the high priority systems. What are those task critical assets and the missions that we truly care about? Now let's reverse engineer some of these things in place. So we can stop hemorrhaging bad systems on, provide options to get after operational resiliency, and then set ourselves in a position of strategic advantage for those critical systems that we've identified right now out in the force. So with that, I am all out of slides, and I think I'm at exactly 30 minutes, which my 5-4 friends from JFHU Doden are going to give me a thumbs up because I think I'm right on time. So I'm going to pause, and I'm going to kick this over to folks if they have any particular questions. Hopefully there are questions. Otherwise, I'll just vamp for a little bit. Sir. Yeah, sorry.
So how do you expect this to go out to the tactical edge, down to the DDIL, and to those types of forces all the way that don't necessarily have either the resources or the bandwidth to send this information all the way back up?
Automation, right? So yeah, this gets into designing systems appropriately in the first place. So those authority to connect requirements start to articulate whether continuous monitoring, for example, is installed natively in the system. So the operators at the tactical edge, they don't need to worry about it because their system has organic ConMon capability in place. Unless you're talking about the options here.
Well, I'm just saying that for example,
yeah,
a unit like JCSC that's a joint unit that supports COCOMs, right? We don't necessarily know. We go out the door, we jump out of the airplane, and there's a man pack. That man pack does not have the CPU, the other capabilities to provide that roll-up necessarily. So then you go up to the next level, which in a JCSE perspective would be it's JTE, and that's where we would monitor all traffic that would be going up to the Doden. So we have the ability to see there, but because that jumpable kit, that small initial entry kit does not necessarily have, maybe in the future when you can virtualize some of those systems or improve that, but what's that expectation?
Yeah, I think first stage is take the blinders off, right? Like you hit on a seemingly risky system. So we need the supported commanders to understand that risk is present. Now, what can I do about the risk, right? So long term, maybe I can create a virtualized solution that I can push remotely, and I have full control over that. In the meantime, the options are going to be relatively limited. Understanding that if it is running an OS or it's running certain software and we're starting to dead reckon away from a known good, vulnerabilities are piling up and whatever else, identifying that those vulnerabilities are there in the first place starts to tell us how we can, what we can look for, what we can scan for, whatever else. It can start to provide decisions for the program office potentially to hurry up and get a nativeized patch out or rebaseline the OS or whatever they have to do, or bump the firmware, whatever they have to do on that manpack to get it to a new, more secure baseline. But if we don't pay attention to it because we're like, that's barely on the Doden in the first place, we don't understand that, no, that is a significant part of that mission thread in support of that commander. And so really the first piece is just illuminating the risk so that we can anticipate. And then back to that definition of resiliency and whatever else. There are a lot of things that we can do. I can make sure that that those JCSE forces have options to be able to re-image that if it does break down or whatever else, right? Or to make sure that if whoever that program or PMW is that built that thing in the first place, that they identify the right folks to be able to come out or walk them through something in extremis over the phone. Et cetera. So that I think is the key principle in this.
Okay.
Again, not the technical resiliency of how do I get a better manpack. It's how do I do better with the manpack that I have.
Okay.
I'm going to link to that and try and be a bit taller. How do we convince the operational commander to train with that modified manpack you've got to actually execute and train with their pace plans? Because they all want to train with all the equipment they think they're going to have on the day of the races. But reality is likely to be very different, but the appetite to train in that scenario is just not there.
Yeah, it's I think a mix of I'm afraid to break this system because I'm actively using it, and I don't care about the cyber stuff, I care about the other stuff, right? So there's generally a demand signal for integrating cyber into our exercises. And I think that generally translates as I want more OCO, I want to blow stuff up, give me strike options, right? I think the answer that they're actually looking for or that they need, maybe not the one they want, but the one that they need, is to find these technical options, set these standards, and inject those as training options. Getting over the I'm afraid to break it piece, right? Like this is had some submarine friends who kind of talked to me about the difference between the surface fleet and the submarine fleet and their willingness to break things, right? So that the submariners will tell you that they're going to be 200 feet under the water. They don't want to be down there worrying about whether a system is going to fail at any given time. So they will take a wrench, they'll just start unplugging stuff to see what happens. That's the kind of the culture shift that we need to get to. If we're afraid of the system is a problem. We have to be more willing to break it. We've got to start popping star clusters on these problematic systems and then hold people accountable for what we bought in the first place. We were sold 4 nines of availability, and I'm getting a situation where I kind of get a 9 if I don't touch it or think about it. And so we really have to inject, we have to be more forceful and get out there. And then I think showing the risk to mission along with this starts to get after the so what. If we're like, we're not just here to break cyber stuff and make your lives difficult, we're here to illuminate that there is risk associated with that system and then help you fix that, remediate that, give you the options. If re-imaging in 4 hours is the goal, then we're going to help you get to where you can do that in 4 hours, and you don't have to fly somebody out and have a casualty report live for 2 weeks, or whatever the reality is that they live.
Thank you.
Morning, sir. Quick question in regards to, you talked about multiple different audiences, acquisitions folks, operators, maintainers, creators. How do you message this concept to them such that they not only understand it but are also able to implement it?
Yeah, I think it's similar to tailoring the mission. You certainly have to tailor it. So the mission that I present to the operational commander is going to be fascinating but irrelevant to the program office, right? The program office is unfunded requirement, right? So ensuring that we're working the system appropriate to the audience that we're talking to. I think that there is a cyber audience, cybercom, the CSSPs, the SOCs, the CPTs, and others that understand cyber for cyber's sake, and we really need to be able to talk about that. There's the commander audience and the services and others who care about warfighting, and we need to talk about what is it that cyber is enabling for them. And then there's the program of the acquisitions community, which is where we need to figure out how to fill the role of the requirement holder, the capability requirement holder that I think we haven't necessarily got into as cleanly. And that gets back to the Klinger-Cohen and the Goldwater-Nichols bifurcation, and is cyber a business function or is it a warfighting domain? And if it's exclusively a business function, then CIOs are that capability requirement holder, and they're setting what the appropriate threshold is. But I don't think that's the case exclusively anymore. I think we have to lean in and make it clear that these are the requirements, and if you don't meet them, what is the next step? Potentially some acquisition reform down the road on how can we make them less unfunded requirements and make them more funded requirements. And I think that's happening with enhanced budget controls and Cybercom getting more service-like authorities, but it is still very nascent. So more to follow. See, I don't know what happens if I finish early, so.
I don't know either, sir. Sir, how are you? Sir, how would you address the cyber warfighting domain as a new warfighting domain that consists of multi-domain operations, and the perception that cyber operators don't speak warfighter language, and then the need for us to have a creative language? For example, resiliency is a great term, but as you said, there is no clear-cut doctrinal definition. So that presents a problem. However, a lot of cyber activities are not being related to warfighter language. The combatant commanders or tactical, operational, strategic commanders understand. Therefore, to the gentleman's point, we wouldn't be able to evaluate cyber activities in national trainer centers or whole commanders of Canada. Can you give us a little bit of insight into how we fix that gap?
Yeah, I think that's a tough one. I think it's about a 20-year-long question that folks have been asking at least. My perspective, just my perspective, is emphasizing first cyber as a support function. I think new warfighting domains cut their teeth in a support role. Right? We saw this with aviation. What does it support to land and sea? Before understanding, what it could do in and of itself. We have to figure out first what is the cyber support, its linkage into the rest of the warfighting domains, before we start beating our chest and saying, hey, we're a warfighting domain too. We did it the opposite direction. We came right in, we said, we're cyber guys, and we got put at the kids' table a little bit. We see this on strike groups with the information warfare commander, being a new warfare commander and really sitting at the end of the table. So showing value to the warfighter is the way to get them to acknowledge the value of the domain in the first place. And then we can evolve that into the next step, where it can be maybe what are the maritime effects that can support cyber, right? What accesses can I get, whatever else. But we do that first by saying this is how we enable maritime warfare and whatever else. Is that okay? Great. Ma'am?
Hi, my name is Jordan Fisher. I'm an AI solutions architect with IBM. I was wondering, I did miss the beginning of your presentation, so I may have missed the answer to my question, but I was wondering if there are any we're talking about software. Is there any AI involved? Is there, machine learning, deep learning, and are there any special considerations to prevent against things like model drift or adversarial attacks?
So this is a lot of this is conceptual, right? So I think the Navy's gone down a certain amount of path on this for a real capability, and what we discover pretty quickly is while there are areas that like machine learning in general, certainly on like where we get, if you're looking at the sensor problem of all of the different information requirements, the different data types that are coming in, a lot of it is free text and ungoverned data. So machine learning provides advantage on how do I normalize all of that data set into something clean so that I don't have to have a person, correcting, if somebody put an extra A in a word or, whatever else. But AI needs somebody to teach it. So just giving all this problem set to AI, we're going to get a wonky solution. We have to collectively build the training material, and then I think when we get to the automation side, right, how do I grow this? AI is absolutely where we want to go. We want to, when we get into this picture and we're providing options for a commander or determining which commander is best postured to affect that option, that's all where AI comes in, the higher level version of this. But going in and determining what is the association between a system and a mission, AI is not going to have that visibility because it's leaving the logical and getting into the physical, and it doesn't necessarily have that sensor in the physical. It needs an operator to come in and say, yeah, I'm not able to drop bombs anymore when I don't have my planning system in place. And so once that foundation is in, I think is where we take that next step into AI.
Quick question. I wonder, does the shift towards a cybersecurity paradigm affect at all your methodology and approach?
When you say cybersecurity paradigm, like versus information assurance, or?
No, for zero trust, where your focus becomes protecting the data's assumption that the perimeters are already breached, they're already in our networks.
Yeah. So
that paradigm shift.
So I think we in general operate with that assumption in place. I think there will be indicators that will need to be tailored as we start to understand what does the baseline for zero trust look like, and how is it tailored and unique in certain circumstances? What is zero trust enough? As we shape those indicators, an indicator that comes in and tells me it's red, yellow, green, the zero trust controls that are in place are good, that helps me understand the risk. In general, try to avoid a bastion approach, though. Like you don't see internet access points or boundaries and whatever else as the key indicators here. It's really looking more at the vulnerability footprint across the board, which does kind of marry up with a presumption of breach. The zero trust indicator is just the one where, what is zero trust enough for an enterprise system? I think we generally are getting a good idea of that, but what is zero trust enough for an industrial control system or a mission system or whatever else? That's the part where we need to get into so that we can start to populate that indicator. Sir?
Yeah, at one of the other theaters, they talked about the joint warfighting cyber architecture and U.S. Cybercom's newly acquired acquisition authority, and that all service cyber acquisitions would go through them, and they would orchestrate across the services. Can you talk a little bit about the Navy's interaction with that, and how we're gonna put our requirements into that, and what that dynamic's gonna look like?
Yeah, I don't think I'm supposed to talk for the Navy now that I'm on the Joint Force, but I know the Navy in general has been skeptical.
Your comments will be off the record.
Okay, yeah, it's just recorded, right? And I'm just wearing the uniform. I think in general there's a leap of faith that's going to have to occur for the services in trusting JICWA, and however, on paper it makes a lot of sense. Why are we doing cyber? And even if you step back from the services and you look at all the components, right? 45 different ways where there is more efficiency optimization by centralizing those things, right? To do this right, we are looking to JICWA to provide that analytic fabric, the brokers, the transport, the analytic everything to get after this. Those are requirements that have been leveraged on JICWA. And it's not just because we're their subordinate headquarters, but because they're funded to do this in the first place. It doesn't make any sense for us to try to do it ourselves. The modernization effort of the various BDPs and different analytic fabrics that the different services have done to move those into JICWA, yeah, they're going to have to do it, but they're not going to do it until it works and is here. So it's a little bit of a chicken and an egg. Yeah.
Morning, Captain. Thank you for the presentation. I was curious about your comment. You mentioned something about zero trust controls, and I'm sort of curious why you call them controls. My understanding is it's a strategy and an approach to an implementation of tailorization. So what I'm seeing is how your information requirements can be informing your tailorization strategy for implementing a zero trust approach. So I'm sort of curious how you view that difference.
Yeah, so I guess what I was seeing in my head when I said that was an overlay. So from an RMF language, right, if we're talking about baseline cybersecurity of a system, and we're saying that zero trust has been employed, what is that overlay on that NIST framework that says, hey, when I say access controller, I say ICAM, this is a zero trust sufficient ICAM solution, so that at an operational level where I don't have the technical expertise across the myriad different systems to be able to evaluate, that I can look at that standard and say, all right, well, according to the standard and how the overlay was applied to that system, these guys are not meeting the baseline requirement. And so I can see deviation that way. The other approach would be, looking at that fan chart of, 100 some different, controls, the target and the advanced and whatever, and then suddenly I've got, 130 different unique indicators that say, well, did they do macro segmentation? What about micro segmentation? I don't want to necessarily get into that world and just say, instead I stand on the shoulders of NIST here and I say, did they meet the requirements in the zero trust overlay that's associated with their particular platform?
Yeah, thank you. As a follow-up, I think you were talking about the capabilities and activities, right, that DoD is pursuing for their targeted zero trust strategy. But when you talk about the overlays, I think when you said the zero trust enough, are you trying to say that they've implemented the overlays that you intended for your
yes, with a residual
systems?
risk that is sufficient for their association to a mission, right? If we're talking about NC3 or national decision making or something, my risk tolerance is much lower. So they better have gotten it spot on, if not like the lowest of low. But if we're talking about the windshield wipers on a destroyer, I'll accept a little bit of high to very high risk on whether they implemented zero trust right. So it's going to depend.
All right, thank you very much.
Sure.
One more for you, sir. From the perspective of someone's going to implement this, another organization is going to implement this after seeing how we put it together, what would you say is step one? How would you guide them into implementation?
So what I'd recommend from for presenting a product, or and it's going to be varied, right? If it's a system itself, this is a C2 system to begin with. Think about the information requirements, the things that we're interested in, and proactively provide those. Whether that is I can meet all the information requirements and present those as part of the deliverable, or think about its association to mission and providing that, or think about the options. Provide those options as part of the instructions for the system to begin with. If instead it's what was being presented is a COP solution, or like how do I visualize all of these things, understand that the visualization is not the hard part. The hard part is being able to do the brokerage and the association with all of those different things. And that we are looking to JICWA, but I think JICWA is looking to the community to figure out what are the different components that they're going to absorb in. So this, and we talked about the AI and the machine learning piece a little bit. Those are the applications that I see being particularly valuable here. All right, well, if there are no other questions, I greatly appreciate everyone's time, and I'll be hanging around afterward if anyone has questions they didn't want to say into the microphone or the recording. But thank you all very much.